pray for your leading and your guidance. We pray for your knowledge and sharing and everything that is done. It will be done for your glory and for your honor. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Unika. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, a glowing legacy, bioluminescence, and education for a peaceful coexistence. Thank you so much for making the time. I am Nikki Myers. I'll be your moderator for the day's proceedings. And at this time, I'm going to invite Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, the Executive Director of the Institute of Jamaica, to welcome everyone officially today. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Okay, morning, everyone. Okay, on behalf of the Natural History Museum of Jamaica and the Institute of Jamaica, I am honored to welcome you to this landmark event, the official opening of our new exhibition, A Glowing Legacy, examining Jamaica's Oyster Bay bioluminescence for peaceful coexistence. Today's event is especially significant as we gather to celebrate the International Day for Education 2025. This day reminds us of the profound role that education plays in shaping a sustainable future and preserving the natural treasures of our world. Here in Jamaica, we are blessed with some of the most breathtaking ecosystems, and one of the most awe-inspiring sensations is right at our doorstep. And it serves as a living testament to the beauty and fragility of our natural environment. This symposium and exhibition are more than just an opportunity to witness the magic of bioluminescence. They are a call to action. Through the combined efforts that can safeguard our coastal treasures, we are reminded that knowledge is power. The more we understand about these fragile ecosystems, the better equipped we will be to ensure their survival. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our esteemed partners, including UNESCO. And so here we have Mr. Hannum from UNESCO and other members of his staff. The TPDCO, Mr. Damian Shirley is here representing the TBDCO as well as other members of staff. Thank you so much. The Forestry Department, the Alligator Head Foundation, we have Ms. Nikki Myers, who is our moderator for today, and other members of the board of the Alligator Head Foundation, and our international collaborators, Thyssen Bornemisa Art Contemporary, TBA 21 Academy, and the Office of Contemporary Art in Norway. Your support underscores the global importance of Jamaica's ecosystem
of bioluminescence. So let's get into the presentations from our panelists, and then we're going to move into the opportunity to be able to have a robust, short, substantial conversation as we pour into what are the next steps, where we are now, where we're coming from, and what are the next steps moving forward. Thank you very much. So we're waiting for the connection with Michael Latt.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Dr. Latz, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can now. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's make him feel welcome.
I'm sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Not seeing anything yet. Yeah? Oh,
Okay.
can we get the lights on the stage off? That will assist us a little better. Not possible? No, okay, not possible.
Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and greetings from San Diego, California. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this symposium. So, diversity of organisms in the ocean that produce bioluminescence, and several of them are featured here. There are microscopic organisms, all the way up to fish, squid, and even some sharks. Many of these organisms produce bioluminescence to protect themselves from predators, but the squid at the lower left uses bioluminescence for camouflage. The anglerfish just above it in the left middle uses its bioluminescence to attract prey to it. And the flashlight fish in the bottom middle use their bioluminescence produced from this white patch below their eye to come out at night to find food. But today I'll be featuring displays of bioluminescence from the ocean surface. Most of the animals in the deep sea are bioluminescent, but it's the ocean surface where we've long noticed beautiful displays of bioluminescence from moving ships and along the shore. This spectacular image was from Australia with the bioluminescence below and the stars above. This image of bioluminescence from Hong Kong shows a different kind of lights, city lights, that have the potential to impact our viewing bioluminescence. So all these kinds of displays are produced by microscopic organisms. They're considered phytoplankton. They're called dinoflagellates. And I featured 3 dinoflagellates here. The one on the right, Noctiluca scintillans, is found worldwide and responsible for many displays of bioluminescence. The one on the left, Linguloidinium polyhedra, produces bioluminescent displays where I am, in Southern California. And then Pyridinium bahamense in the middle is responsible for the bioluminescence in the Caribbean and Indonesia, tropical areas. So these are microscopic and yet very important to the ecosystem. So how do they produce bioluminescence? Well, it's all about the chemistry. There are 2 molecules involved. Luciferin is the molecule that is oxidized. And during this oxidation reaction, it releases energy in the form of light. Luciferase is the other molecule involved, and it's a protein, and it facilitates this reaction. And the way I like to think about this is like a glow stick, where initially the glow stick is not producing light, but you need to crack it, shake it, there's different chemicals in there, and one of them is oxidized and releases light. And so the color of the light is shown here in different colors, is a result of the chemistry. And it's the same way for bioluminescence. The primary color of bioluminescence is in the blue-green, but there are some cases of green and yellow and even very rarely red bioluminescence, and it's all a result of the chemistry. And so the bioluminescence of dinoflagellates functions to protect them from predators. So now I want to show you what it looks like at the cellular level. So this video is a result of an artist collaboration, myself with Yvonne Koo, who is an artist from Singapore. And here we're filming individual dinoflagellate cells that are being stimulated to produce light. And here we see in slow motion, but each individual cell is being stimulated by mechanical forces and producing a flash of light that lasts about 1/10 of a second or so. And here we see it even at higher magnification. The feature of the bioluminescence from dinoflagellates, it comes from these point sources within the cell. So here we're looking at several cells, and I hope you can see that there are little dots within each cell. That's where the light is coming from. There are vesicles, and the chemistry, the luminescent chemistry, is found within these vesicles. And when they're stimulated, then they respond. Now, where I am in San Diego, sometimes the ocean looks like this. This is not due to sedimentation or runoff, but this is due to a large number of dinoflagellates that have accumulated. You get this reddish brown color, and that's because there are many, many organisms present. This is looking under a microscope. Each little dot is a single dinoflagellate, and each one has a little bit of this tan color, brown color, which is in fact sunscreen, protecting them from ultraviolet light damage. So when you put a lot of these organisms together, the ocean looks kind of brownish during the day, and we call this red tide, meaning that the organisms are very abundant. So it's kind of red-brown during the day, and at night you can get spectacular displays of bioluminescence. And in this case, we're seeing bioluminescence along the side of the boat and associated with the swimming of the dolphins. Now, dolphins are not bioluminescent, but as they swim through the water, the friction forces along their body stimulates the bioluminescence of the dinoflagellates that are present in very large numbers. This is during 2020 when we had a spectacular red tide event throughout Southern California. And here we're looking at something really special for all the surfers out there in the audience, the ability to surf at night in bioluminescent waves. And this was filmed at Scripps, and just spectacular bioluminescence. So Scripps scientists have been monitoring these red tides for more than a century. And this timeline shows the occurrence of the red tides through 2019. In 2020, we had the strongest red tide on record. And since then, there's been a number of events as a follow-up to that. The thing about these red tides where I am is that we can't predict when they're going to occur and how long they're going to last. In fact, we have no idea when they're going to happen. We know they're here when we see them. So that's not very good. It's not a very good predictive capability. as yet. But there are places in the world where bioluminescence is fairly predictable. And there are bioluminescent bays in the Caribbean where bioluminescence persists throughout the year. There are 3 bays in Puerto Rico, which is on the right side here. There is a bay in St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is the rightmost star. There's Oyster Bay in Jamaica that we're hearing about today. On the left is on Grand Cayman Island. There's a bay. And there's a star up in the Bahamas on New Providence Island. That's the first described bioluminescent bay known in the mid-1800s. So there are a few of these bioluminescent bays in the Caribbean, and they just have spectacular displays of bioluminescence. And in Puerto Rico, it's possible to go on kayak tours and experience it for yourself. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. All the bioluminescent bays in the Caribbean have one species of dinoflagellate that is the source of the bioluminescence, called Pyridinium bahamense, originally described from that bioluminescent bay in the Bahamas. It's small. There's about 200 cells you could fit on the head of a pin, and they are photosynthetic, so they harvest the energy of the sun to grow, and they are very good swimmers. In fact, they swim up towards the sun during the day, very strongly attracted to the sun, and then they disperse at night. And a very important feature of their life cycle is that they which sinks down into the sediment, and the cyst can remain viable in the sediment for up to 100 years, and then can reemerge from the cyst to form new swimming cells. So the cyst is a life stage that allows the dinoflagellate to survive, and the sediment of bioluminescent bays are filled with many cysts, and allows the bays to recover after, for example, storm events. So here I'm showing 4 bioluminescent bays from the Caribbean, the 3 from Puerto Rico, and the one at the upper right is from St. Croix. They all share common features. So if we look at the St. Croix Bay as an example, there's a restricted opening to the sea, so that organisms that grow within the bay are retained within the bay and not easily flushed out by tides and currents. The prevailing winds are from right to left in these images, and so that tends to also keep them within the bay instead of pushing surface waters out. The bays are shallow, and so sunlight reaches all the way to the bottom, promoting the growth of the dinoflagellates. And very importantly, the bays are fringed by mangroves. And mangroves have a very numerous root system that is colonized by bacteria, and the bacteria produce B vitamins that are important to the growth of the dinoflagellates. So all these bioluminescent bays share these features, and they promote the growth of Pyridinium bahamense and allows it to become abundant. So here we have Oyster Bay, Jamaica, and it was intensively studied by Howard Seliger and colleagues, who are scientists from the US, in the 1960s. And they were able to study its bioluminescence using an instrument lowered into the water. They also studied the features of the bay and looked at the dinoflagellate abundance. And one important thing that they found is that the measured bioluminescence was very strongly correlated to the abundance of the dinoflagellates. So this is important because it means that we can use the abundance of the organisms as a proxy for bioluminescence, even without having to measure bioluminescence using a fancy instrument. So this work was done in the 1960s, and as we know, since then there have been changes to Oyster Bay. There's more development. There's a wharf in Falmouth to handle the large cruise ships. So the questions, there's also more light, nighttime lighting. So the questions are, how has this changed Oyster Bay? How has it affected the water circulation, the dinoflagellate abundance, and the bioluminescence? So, as I mentioned, there are only a few bioluminescent bays in the Caribbean. Oyster Bay is the largest. But if we add up these numbers, it's only about 5 square kilometers. So just to put this number in perspective, the total area of coral reefs in the Caribbean is about 22,000 square kilometers. So from my point of view, bioluminescent bays are very rare and special ecosystems. So I want to leave you with these points. Overuse by people who love to visit the bays, and then light contamination from nearby development. So these bays need protection, and the mangroves need protection. In fact, the entire watershed needs protection. Now, fortunately, the bays in Puerto Rico and St. Croix sit within nature preserves. There's still issues with their conservation, but at least those areas have taken the first steps to protect the bays and keep the bioluminescence as healthy as possible. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll leave you with this view of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and I'm so lucky and fortunate to be able to participate. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Latz. And we are now going to invite Dr. Emma Ranston-Young to bring her perspective to the discussion, and then we're going to be able to move into getting everybody else involved. Let's make her feel welcome.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miles, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this symposium. Good morning, everyone. Okay, this morning I'll be sharing with you some of the history, characteristics, and the status of the glistening waters of Oyster Bay, which you now know is located along the north coast of the island, along the coastline of Falmouth in the parish of Trelawney. Oyster Bay, next slide, please. Oyster Bay didn't always look as calm, shallow, and well protected from the ocean, as shown in this image here. Before Bush Peninsula was created, it was actually separated into two areas. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, thanks. Right, before the Bush Peninsula was created, it was divided into two areas, the Bush Key, shown here, and a low headland known as the Florida Headland. And these two areas were separated by a narrow, shallow channel. So most of the bay was actually exposed to the open ocean. Research indicates that during the mid to late 18th century, Oyster Bay, known at the time as, can you go back? Yes, that slide, thanks. Oyster Bay was known as the Martha Brae Estuary, was actually a very busy seaport for Trelawney's banana and sugar industries. Wharfs and warehouses were established along the shoreline at the Rock Community, that is right here, and the Rock Community still exists today. So there were various wharfs and warehouses established there for receiving, storing, and shipping of estate produce such as sugar, rum, and molasses at the time. Sugar barons of the day boasted that Trelawney was the richest sugar-producing parish in the island. Unfortunately, this attracted the attention of pirates who used to sneak through this channel here, which identified as a pirate channel. They used to sneak through this channel and come down to the wharfs and warehouses and plunder them. After 1793, frustrated merchants and residents of the area started to fill in this channel with materials such as mangrove roots in an attempt to block the pirates' passage. This, along with sedimentation from ocean currents over time, permanently filled in that channel and other areas, as shown, giving rise to what is now known as the Bush Peninsula. Okay, so the Bush Key and the Florida Headland became connected, forming the Bush Peninsula. And the formation of this Bush Peninsula, next slide, please. Yeah. Next. Okay, thank you. The formation of the Bush Peninsula was very important as it drastically reduced water exchange between the bay and the ocean. It had a sheltering effect from ocean waves and currents, and it allowed for the development of a calm, shallow estuary, which was renamed Oyster Bay. So the stage was now set for the development of favorable conditions for the proliferation of bioluminescent organisms and the formation of a bioluminescent bay, also known as biobays, during about the 19th century. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's look at what bioluminescence looks like. But first, let's define what bioluminescence is. As Professor Latz told us just a while ago, it's basically the emission of light via a chemical reaction within an organism. And in Oyster Bay, this can be seen at night as a neon blue glow in the water when the bioluminescent organisms are disturbed. And they can be disturbed by all forms of mechanical movement. So movement of waves, movement of boats through the water, fish swimming through, or larger marine organisms moving through the water, as well as humans, if we're swimming in that water. These disturbances can all create or result in an organism producing the bioluminescent light. Okay, next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, in aquatic habitats, there are a group of microscopic unicellular algae known as dinoflagellates, and they're reported as being the dominant source of bioluminescent light. More than 2,000 living dinoflagellate species exist, and of this group, only 69 species are reported to be bioluminescent. Here I included a few pictures of some of the dinoflagellates that I found in or throughout Jamaica's coastal waters. They're very interesting organisms. They come in different sizes and shapes, and they just sort of drift along with the water currents. Like plants, they need sunlight to produce their own food, so they photosynthesize. Some persons believe that they are plants, but they're not. they don't have all the characteristics of true plants, so they're considered to be plant-like organisms. Okay, next slide. Okay. Of those 69 bioluminescent dinoflagellates that are known, one of them occurs in Oyster Bay and creates a bioluminescence, and it is known as Paradinium bahamens. This bioluminescence is or serves as a defense mechanism against predators, such as fish, by startling and scaring them with a sudden flash of light as they approach. So if you can't run or swim from your predator, if you can't hide from your predator, for example, via camouflage, then you better be able to stand your ground and either fight that predator or scare, well, in this case, yeah, either fight them, or you could trick them by playing dead, or in the case of Paradinium, they scare their predator with that sudden bright flash of light. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the bioluminescence created by the Paradinium dinoflagellates, I have found is brightest in the innermost regions of the bay. And this is because this area contains the highest concentrations of the dinoflagellate cells. Now, as you move out of the bay, from the inner regions to the outer regions closer to the ocean, the cell concentration decreases. And this is basically because the conditions required for growth of the dinoflagellates becomes less favorable as you move from the inner region of the bay to the outer regions. And this occurs for various reasons. There tends to be, well, of course, the shallow, calmer waters here help to retain the dinoflagellates in this area. The sea floor, or the floor of the bay, is more silty or muddy in this region compared to being rather sandy as you approach the ocean. And the dinoflagellates prefer this silty, muddy sediment. Also, the nutrient concentration of the water tends to be higher in this region, and it decreases as you move out of the bay. And the dinoflagellates need nutrients for growth. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. All right, here I've included a slide showing the combination of characteristics that maintain the bioluminescent dinoflagellates in the bay. What is it about the bay that allows them to stay there? If we look at the top of the screen here, the first thing is that there's a rather narrow entrance to the bay. This helps to reduce water exchange with the ocean, therefore decreasing the number of dinoflagellates that could be washed out of the bay. Along the northern and eastern shoreline here, you have stands of red mangroves, which are key to maintaining dinoflagellates in the area, because they're very important in providing nutrients for the growth of the dinoflagellates, as well as reducing wind activity in this area here. All right, so the mangroves reduce that wind that's produced and helps to maintain the dinoflagellates in the shallow, calm area. The river is very important, the Martha Brae River that flows into Oyster Bay. It carries nutrients into the area, again, which the dinoflagellates need for growth. And the river water allows a freshwater layer to develop on the surface of the bay, which actually becomes brackish because it does mix a little bit with the saline water. But what you have happening in Oyster Bay is a stratified water column. So there's a brackish water layer that is sitting on top of a deeper saline layer. And that is very important in protecting the dinoflagellates or reducing them from being washed out of the bay. Every day in Oyster Bay, maybe at about 10 or 11 in the morning, you have the easterly winds. They start to pick up. And what they do is to blow that brackish surface layer out of the bay. Now, fortunately, the dinoflagellates do not occur or live in that brackish layer. They prefer the deeper saline water. Okay, and that's very fortunate for us. So what happens is the winds start blowing, they blow that brackish surface layer out of the bay, and in return, the lower or the deeper saline layer with the dinoflagellates gets displaced back here into the calm, shallow regions. So basically, you have the dinoflagellates being trapped and transported and trapped in this area here. And this process is called the accumulation mechanism. Okay, so it allows the dinoflagellates to accumulate in that nice shallow eastern area, and they're able to be maintained in high concentrations there, okay, without being blown out or washed out of the bay. So very important in maintaining, very important characteristics together. They work to maintain the dinoflagellates within the bay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so scientists did a lot of research in the 1960s and 1970s, and they found that the wind direction and the position of the river, the Martha Brae River, are considered to be the most important supporting characteristics of bioluminescence. Seliger et al., 1970, reported that if the river entered the bay at another position and the wind blew from a different direction, Paradinium probably would not be successful or exist in the bay. Okay, so that shows you just how important the Martha Brae River is to the existence of the dinoflagellates. Saltmarsh Bay, which is only 8 kilometers west of Oyster Bay, it's similar in size and orientation, but because it doesn't have a heavy freshwater river flow into the area, there's no Paradinium there. Okay, so again, we see the importance of that Martha Brae River. Okay, that fresh water it brings in, forming that nice brackish layer that protects the dinoflagellates from being washed out. So the bioluminescence in Oyster Bay is therefore due to a fortuitous combination of topographic and meteorologic conditions. Okay, so just by chance, all the conditions necessary for the existence of that bay occur right there in Oyster Bay. Okay, next slide, please. Just wanted to share with you some of the trends in Paradinium bioluminescence I have noted over the years. Paradinium concentration and therefore bioluminescence brightness fluctuate. They tend to fluctuate throughout the year with the wet versus the dry seasons. Paradinium concentrations I've found tend to be significantly lower during the cooler, drier months of the year, so November to March, and significantly higher during the hot, rainy months of May to July. So that indicates that the Paradinium concentrations and bioluminescence therefore vary seasonally with water temperature and rainfall. So, next slide, please. Okay, right. Okay, so just want to show on this graph the trend there. So in the cooler, drier months of the year, January to March, you have fairly low concentrations of the dinoflagellates. And as the temperatures increase during the year, and we approach our first rainy season, which is usually about May, June, you see that increase in the dinoflagellate concentrations. As the temperatures start to drop, as we approach August, September, the concentrations drop off a bit, but they pick up again for our second rainy season for Jamaica, which is usually in September and October. As temperatures drop, as we approach the end of the year, and rainfall decreases, you see that decline in the concentrations. So there's this fluctuation in the concentrations of the dinoflagellates throughout the year. They're not always high, okay? There are times when they're low, when temperatures are low, and there's not as much rainfall. And this is because the dinoflagellates, like the nutrients, and a lot of nutrients brought into the water column when there's rainfall via the river, land runoff, etc. Those nutrients, if the dinoflagellates are able to gain access to more nutrients during those rainy seasons, then the concentrations will increase. Drier times, not as much nutrients. The temperatures are lower because the dinoflagellates like higher water temperatures. Then you'll see during those cooler, dry months a decrease in the concentrations. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here I included 2 pictures of views of water samples, how they appear under the microscope, just to compare what I see for a hot, rainy month versus a cool, dry month in terms of the concentrations. For a hot, rainy month, you can see many cells of the dinoflagellates here, and a lot of sediment in the water sample, which really gets in the way, but I have to work with what I see. Compared to a cool, dry month, I'm lucky if I see 2 cells in a field of view of the microscope. In another field of view, I might see 1 cell, and another field of view, no cells. So you see that significant difference in the concentrations of the samples during a hot, rainy month versus a cool, dry month. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, current status of the paradinium population. In recent years, Oyster Bay has continued to show the expected trends in the dinoflagellate concentrations with the seasons, as I just described, that variation. And I noticed that for last year, this trend was disrupted by Hurricane Beryl and other storms that we had, as well as changes in the patterns of the wet versus the dry seasons during 2024. I'm sure you all noticed how very hot it was last year. And the dry seasons were extended beyond what they, when they normally occur. The wet seasons didn't seem to come when we expected them. Everything was late last year. It was very strange. And I believe that all of these changes in the weather patterns affected the paradinium population. But mainly, Hurricane Beryl really had an impact. The paradinium population declined substantially after the hurricane, and this is usually due to dinoflagellates being washed out of the bay when the river is in spate, because there's a lot of rainfall coming in, that river is in spate and pushing that water out of the bay. The excessive winds experienced during a hurricane, of course, are going to blow the dinoflagellates out of the bay within the surface water. And after all that is done, we have a lot of turbid water. Okay, the resulting turbid waters from all the sediment washed into the bay by the river and washed off the land from the rainfall, those turbid waters or cloudy waters are not conducive to the maintenance of high concentrations of the dinoflagellates. They need sunlight to grow. Okay, so all that cloudy water, that gets in the way, and they can't get access to the sunlight that they really need to grow. So all of these things to return to normal. I looked at some samples, some water samples in September of 2024, and found that the dinoflagellate concentrations were still low, but I believe that they were, the population continued to be in what we call the recovery phase. So it takes a lot of time to recover. As it stands now, I expect that conditions have returned to normal, and perhaps members of the audience, anybody here, users of the bay or boat captains or fishermen, if anybody has experience with the conditions in the bay at the moment, please share them with us, because I would love to know what the status is now. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, importance of Oyster Bay. It is one of only 14 known biobays worldwide, with 11 located in the Caribbean. The bioluminescence is visible year-long, which is important because there are some biobays in which a bioluminescence is only visible during certain times of the year. So for Oyster Bay, it's pretty much all year. Oyster Bay is said to be one of the brightest biobays in the world, and of course it provides a unique attraction for both local and foreign visitors, and this has been occurring since the early 1900s. Can you go back to that slide, please? Last slide? Yeah, and of course, provides a source of income for citizens of the area. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. There are a number of issues surrounding the bay. One in particular is that still, to this point, we still don't know that much about the bay. There's a lot that we don't know, and a lot that needs to be researched. So there are many gaps in existing scientific data, unfortunately. There's no regular monitoring of the dinoflagellates in the area, so long-term data is lacking. Okay, but regular monitoring, I would love if the bay could be monitored every month. If it was up to me, I'd be out there every day monitoring the bay, collecting water samples, etc. But that's not practical. So regular monitoring is really required, just to check on how the dinoflagellates are doing. What are the trends that we're seeing? Could anything be impacting them? There's a great need for long-term monitoring programs and more routine monitoring to create a representative database for the bay. The Martha Brae River empties whatever is released into it upstream into Oyster Bay. Do we really know what's entering the bay? I don't know. There are a lot of residential areas there, plantation areas. What is actually going into that river and passing into Oyster Bay? And could those substances be impacting the dinoflagellates right now? So the Martha Brae watershed and the riverbank area, are they being monitored? It's very important to monitor these areas so we know what's coming in. Okay, next slide. Okay, sorry about this. This wasn't the slide that should have been there, but I'll just go through the points. It is important to know what activities occur upstream at the mouth of the river, as these could indicate potential sources of negative impacts to the bay. We know that Oyster Bay is surrounded by heavily used areas or heavy usage areas, including hotels, communities, residential areas, cruise ship port, the activities within which could present potential for negative impacts on the dinoflagellates, especially in absence of regular monitoring. The bay lacks the recognition and the protection status that it deserves and requires upgrading to provide long-term protection needed for maintenance of this delicately balanced system. Okay. Main recommendations: that we have regular, at best monthly, monitoring of the bay and upstream of the river area so that we know what's coming in and what's going on in the bay as much as possible. We need to maintain the hydrodynamics of the Martha Brae River. As we have seen, it is key to the maintenance of the bioluminescence phenomenon. And by hydrodynamics, I mean let's make sure that the path that the river takes, Martha Brae River takes, is not interrupted in any way. The volume of water that's going into Oyster Bay and has been going in for years, that we don't disrupt that, okay? So we need to maintain whatever that river is doing right now is working for the bay. Future studies or monitoring activities in Oyster Bay should attempt to include experts in the field of mangrove ecology, because those mangroves are so important to the bay. Geology, where we look at the sediments that are supporting the dinoflagellates, and freshwater ecology, of course, related to the river, to help fill in the database gaps. And of course, we need to maintain and monitor that shoreline of mangrove stands, as it is so important. Okay, summary. So Oyster Bay is one of only 14 places worldwide where a unique combination of factors has created that biobay. Some biobays in other islands are being overwhelmed by poor water quality, habitat deterioration, light pollution, and mismanagement. We must prevent this from happening to our bay. It might be happening now. Let's monitor, let's keep on top of things and make sure it doesn't get overwhelmed by these factors. In January 2014, a biobay in Puerto Rico remained dark for 6 months. And this was simply due to a shift in the wind direction. While we have no control over nature, we can control our actions. Oyster Bay is too valuable to lose. So let us unite to manage and protect our biobay, ensuring its sustainability for future generations to enjoy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ranston Young. I don't know about you, but I was busy learning so many things. I mean, who was writing down all the notes? I mean, I thought I knew how mangroves protected, but you see how creative those people were in the 1800s? Them just plant up some mangroves, and I'm sure they didn't do as much research as some of the people in the audience that I know. I see Dr. Trench, I see Denise Henry, mangrove enthusiasts who would not have been trying to block out pirates, but they might define some of the threats that we're having to mangroves now as piracy, right, Dr. Trench? So we have gotten into, Dr. Latz brought us through the types of bioluminescence. How do they glow? Students, were you listening? Who can tell me how they glow? Quickly. Anybody? Let's hear. Tell me, how do they glow? Teacher, which one was it? Call his name. Horace? Stand up, sir, and let us know. How do they glow? Talk loud. Is that true? All right. Okay, who did not know but then found out? Put up your hands. All right, let me do a quick check. How many persons here, by show of hands, have been to Oyster Bay? Okay. All right, thank you. How many persons now are curious to go that have not gone? All right, so we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. So we have looked at, with these presentations, we've looked at what is a bioluminescent bay. We've looked at bringing it home here. Dr. Latz talked about the collaboration and the interrelationship of the bioluminescence and mangroves. Everything is interconnected. This is what we are being reminded of. We started the conversation this morning talking about collaboration among agencies and departments and experts, and nature is demonstrating to us the importance of collaboration in getting this phenomenon, this natural phenomenon, this occurrence that we can't find. 1 of 14, this is a major, major thing. You're seeing TPDCO recognizing the importance of that to the heritage, given how much we depend on persons coming to experience Jamaica. And that is an experience. Swimming in waters with a blue-green glow is an experience. Dr. Ranston Young bringing it home to letting us know what the history of the bay is, how colorful and alive that is as a story. And when we put all of that together, what is so special about that bay? The narrow entrance, the red mangrove stands, providing the nutrients and reducing the wind, the Martha Brae carrying the nutrients. And I looked at it, and as she said, it's a fortuitous combination
one species so different, but it's a single species. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So you're looking at least 98% DNA hybridization between the two.
Regions of the genome based on what works best. There's 18S, there's the ITS, there are different genetic regions that are used to classify dinoflagellates.
Right, but the gold standard for classification is DNA hybridization for classification purposes. But that's fine.
Yeah.
The second question is using like flow cytometry, like a mobile flow cytometry platform, and monitoring the chemoluminescence to do the cell count, so you could do your continuous monitoring.
Yes, that's possible. I find that when I actually look at the cells, physically look at them through the microscope, the cells tell a story. What I'm seeing in the microscope is not just the cells, but what's happening around them, what's going on with the water, what other dinoflagellates or other phytoplankton species are in the water with our paradinium. And that tells a story, which flow cytometry doesn't really give you.
Right, it would give you a cell count.
A cell count, yeah. But I also want to know, I can look at the dinoflagellates and determine, okay, they're not looking too happy today. Happy. Okay, so what's going on? They're not looking very healthy. Are there other organisms, other phytoplankton species that are dominating the water column? Okay, because paradinium tends to be the dominant species in Oyster Bay, but when their numbers are low, you might have other species coming in and dominating. Why is that? What's happening? Okay, so I get a lot more information when I actually look at the water samples using a microscope.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And I know, yes, we have another question here. Can we get the microphone down to the front?
Thank you very much, Pat Francis, Alligator Head Foundation. Mine is not a question, it's really a comment. Clearly, we haven't put a value on Oyster Bay, which then brings it to the attention of Jamaica as a whole. And therefore, I think we have some work to do to really get to those who are in the in the administration to understand what we need to do to protect this. Being one of only 14 in the world, with all of the development that's taking place adjacent to it that could possibly impact it, with the potential of pollution from the Martha Brae, from either human impact or from the waste of from fertilizer and chemicals, etc. You know, the loss of this, we should quantify what it means. We should put a number on this to our government, so that we don't have a situation where we're not monitoring what's going on. It's too important not to monitor what's going on. So I certainly would advocate that we that, you know, one of the outcomes of this event and whatever follows from this, that we elevate the value of what this means to the country, what this means to the world. It's not just to the country, it's to the world. So, you know, thank you, Susan, and thank you everybody else who's been working on this. And, you know, it just seems to me that, you know, this should be big news. This ought to be big news. And I mean, as a kid, we used to jump into that water and just have great fun. And, you know, I still do it as an adult, and it's still fascinating. But, so you take it for granted. We all take it for granted, but obviously, being one of only 14, I think it's something that we need to think about in a different way, because maybe some of our administration only understand numbers.
I do have to respond to that. I am sitting here as the chairman of the MAB committee of the Jamaica National Commission for UNESCO. And I must inform the audience and anyone listening that this area is actually a candidate site for a biosphere reserve. It has actually been so for some time.
One moment, please, Ms. Douglas. Let's honor that.
The government of Jamaica, I'm pleased to say, does recognize the importance of this area. In fact, it does not just consider Oyster Bay important. Pretty much all of Trelawney is important. So much of the parish of Trelawney is part of the candidate.
Sir. Social. National organizations to develop Jamaica's community tourism subsector. This initiative entails the designing of unique products and establishing that will promote, conserve, and sustain the communities as well as their tangible and intangible heritage resources. Ms. Rawlock believes in the power of responsible tourism to foster economical development, cultural exchange, and increase environmental stewardship. Let us make her feel welcome. Donaldson. Her government 2001 moved over to the work there today. Ms. Donaldson is presently the Senior Manager, Conservation and Protection Subdivision in the National Environment and Planning Agency, which is Jamaica's premier environment and planning agency, and has headed sections responsible for ecosystems and project management. Let us make her feel welcome. Joining our panel as well is Ms. Tamoy Sinclair. Tamoy Sinclair is the current Chief Executive Officer acting of the Trelawney Municipal Corporation. She's responsible for the daily operations of the organization, but also has a background in training and education, disaster management, sustainable development, and urban and regional planning, which is very useful for shaping peaceful, just, and sustainable societies. Ms. Sinclair is a trained urban and regional planner with a BSc in urban and regional planning from the University of Technology, Jamaica. A trained teacher and trainer of trainers, having a postgraduate diploma, education and training from Vocational Training Development Institute, a postgraduate diploma in general management, and the Trainer of Trainer certificate from the Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, with several other certification courses in disaster management. She has worked as an urban planner on special projects out of the Office of the Prime Minister on the North Coast Development Preliminary Study Project, which aim to map project growth and make recommendations for social and physical infrastructural development. She acquired a passion for educating others and became a trained teacher, during which period taught grades 7 to 9 at St. George's College. Combining her training in urban planning, for which disaster management was a core area of study, she served for 15 years as a parish coordinator, disaster preparedness at the St. James Municipal Corporation. In her tenure there, she was integral in developing practical programs to educate persons while Ms. Douglas is looking at all the persons who are going to pour into that dossier that we are all working towards. So we are now going to move into our discussion and our presentations. The format remains the same, where the presenters will be able to put together, and I'm going to ask to see, we're a little bit behind time, but we're all excited and going. So we're going to start with Ms. Rhea Rollock and her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. So you can see from the screen that I will be speaking on safeguarding our economies and linkages between the sector, tourism, culture, and the environment. Next slide, please. The Luminous Lagoon is one of few known bioluminescent bays found in the Caribbean. Microorganisms known as dinoflagellates create a mesmerizing display of an interactive night experience. It stands as one of Jamaica's extraordinary natural wonders that attract global visitors annually. The unique phenomenon serves as a driving economic resource for local business operators, like fishermen, boat tour guides, shuttle service drivers, hoteliers, and restaurateurs. The intrinsic value of this ecosystem integrates the driving force of tourism and the crucial necessity of conservation. The enforcement of sustainable and conservative measures is vital to ensure the preservation of the luminous lagoon. Next. So let's dive into the tourism value of this bioluminescent bay. It offers a visual and interactive experience that can only be seen at night, as I previously mentioned. This provides product offerings such as nightly boat tours and swimming. Job creation in the fisheries, hospitality, and environmental conservation sectors. It has historically been identified as one of Jamaica's thriving economic hubs since the 18th century, when sugar was one of the main exports to England. I'm pretty sure we've heard before that sugar was once known as king. The lagoon was used as a wharf to house ships and small boats for import and export of goods. This unique and rare ecosystem, provides greater opportunities for scientific studies and serves as an educational platform to highlight the importance of conservation and increase use of sustainable practices to the public. Next. Before we go any further, next. Let's talk a little bit about the blue economy. So the blue economy and the small island developing states. So the blue economy is defined by the World Bank as the sustainable use of the ocean's resources for economic growth, improved livelihoods, and jobs while preserving the health of the ocean's ecosystem. In this case, we can also say coastal and marine. So a little did you know facts. In 2016, the ocean's assets were valued at 24 trillion USD, with the global gross domestic product of 3.5 to 7%. In the Caribbean regions, small island development states, SIDs, depend greatly on the coastal and marine ecosystems as a source of food, job creation, and generation. And I can say for myself, coming from a small island of Barbados, that is 166 square miles. It can fit into Kingston comfortably. A lot of my neighbors were fishermen. A lot of my neighbors depended heavily on the ocean, on the coast, for their livelihoods. Even my dad is a fisherman, and I grew up as a fisher woman. According to the United Nations, the blue economy accounts for 9% of the Caribbean's GDP and 13% of regional employment. So we can see how important it is for these sensitive environments to the rest of the Caribbean and the island of Jamaica. So what can we do to safeguard the lagoon and its resources, since we realize how important it is? So we have sustainable tourism practices, legislation assessments, policy and support, education and awareness, community-based conservation efforts. The luminous lagoon's fragile ecosystem is vulnerable to degradation from the negative impacts of things such as over-tourism and unsustainable practices. To mitigate these impacts, the tourism sector must adopt more sustainable conservative practices. This will require the cooperation and responsible management of various stakeholders, such as business owners, government agencies, environmental organizations, schools, and community groups. So let's segue into sustainable tourism practices. By implementing a carrying capacity for the number of boats that are allowed to enter the lagoon per night. Another one is visitor management. This can be done through limiting the number of visitors who are allowed to swim in the lagoon to decrease environmental degradation caused by human disturbances. And another one, and two others, are professionally guided tours and timed entries. Tours should be conducted by certified tour guides who are knowledgeable about the natural history of the area. This will prevent the spread of misinformation and desensitization of the importance of the ecosystem. Next. Develop regulations and guidelines. So, assessment permits and protective policies should be enforced to support and protect the lagoon and prevent pollution and exploitation. This would include elements such as the JTB license, Jamaica Tourist Board license for watercraft vehicles, tour operator license, lifeguard certification, and assessment and penalties for violations. To go further in depth, this would include monitoring and restriction of developments and other industrial activities within and around the environment zone, fitness compliance of vessels, safety gear and equipment, pollution controls on waste disposal during tours, at accommodations and restaurants. While I attended a tour at Glistening Waters, the tour guide was very, very, very adamant in repeating the fact that whatever you bring on the boat, you take off the boat. He ensured that there was no littering, no noise pollution, no light pollution. He asked that you turn off all of your lights, no flash. They were very, very careful in how they wanted to raise the importance of the resources in the lagoon. Next. Education and public awareness, sorry. So educational methods for the lagoon's tourism play a vital role in promoting sustainability and awareness to better enhance the overall experience of the lagoon. So in workshops and seminars, sharing in-depth knowledge through platforms such as where we are right now at the Institute of Jamaica provides greater insight of the subject matter from professionals from various sectors and community members. Even you, the students, your questions and your responses, they are valuable feedback so we can have a better understanding on how we can preserve the environment. Visitor engagement. Through storyboards and guided tours offer active learning through the use of storytelling as well as question and answer segments. Community initiatives like post-engagement through follow-up sessions and surveys provide crucial qualitative data of the visitors' overall experience and allows for continuous improvement of the product. Involving schools and local community groups in data collection projects fosters a sense of contribution to conservation of the lagoon and a sense of pride for local community members. To conclude, the valuable linkages between the Luminous Lagoon and tourism extends beyond mere aesthetics. It connects various related sectors such as economic development, environmental and cultural conservation, educational involvement, and community enrichment. It is imperative to create and maintain a balance between sustainable tourism, development, and conservative practices to prevent environmental degradation of the lagoon, thus preserving the bioluminescent treasure for the livelihoods of present and future generations of Jamaica. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rollock, and some takeaways there. It's important for us to know that we can't promote or protect what we don't know about. So it's essential for us to make sure that we get intimately involved with the knowledge of what we have here. 1 of 14. Keep it resonating, 1 of 14. So coming from TBDCO, it's a value of the blue economy. It's that circularity with everything that exists in our country. It's the importance of sensitive environments. And while tourism is important, we must adopt sustainable practices, the importance of education, some of the tangible things that we can do, you know, putting in the carrying capacity, the management and the monitoring framework, and we are looking at the connection with the many sectors. It's economy, it's environment, it's education to be able to move forward. So thank you so much, Ms. Rollock, for pouring in as we look to a hearty and robust conversation after that. We're now going to invite Mrs. Lalita Davis-Mattis to do her presentation as we look at pulling together all the different sectors and everything that we're looking at into getting this dossier well prepared.
Thank you, Nikki, and good afternoon, friends and colleagues, students. I'm going to try and not repeat what the other presenters have already said, but my presentation is based primarily on a project that Professor Winterling and a group of us have been working on for quite a number of years. That group also includes TBA 21, the Alligator Head Foundation, Professor Michael Latz, and another team of professors, including also Emma Ranston, the University of the West Indies, of course. I'm just going to go through very quickly. And what we're looking at here is protecting bioluminescence as an ecosystem and focusing on the interface of science, arts, law, cultural studies, humanities, and indigenous knowledge. And for indigenous knowledge, another term for it for your students is people science. And really that what it's about is there are scientists who go to university and study science, the cause and effects. There are also persons who have never been there, but who, because of their interface with the environment every day, they also have their own understanding of how the ecosystems work. And for that we call people science, or we call it traditional knowledge. And there is an effort, in fact I think it's an accepted norm, that both areas need to be combined in order for us to protect our environment. Next slide, please. So this is just a picture, you have seen much of that, and of what the bay actually looks like. And one of the areas that we actually look at from the legal perspective is nature's rights. Does nature itself have rights? So we've been talking about dinoflagellates, which you cannot see if you go out in the daytime, and which you can only see if you ask Dr. Ranston Young to look in a microscope to tell you what's actually there. Does nature itself have rights? Because, as we have been discussing, a lot of the focus is on us as human beings. But as Nikki said, during COVID, the place was flourishing. Natural resources were coming back because we were out of the space. So the issue is, does nature have rights? There's a discussion you may want to have among yourselves in your classrooms, but there's a dialogue that nature actually has rights. And there are countries in the world that have actually accorded rights to nature. So fish have rights, dinoflagellates have rights, water has rights. But remember, we are looking at ecosystems. So within any water body, there are numerous species that interface with each other, that are dependent on each other. And when Dr. Ranston Young gave her presentation, we talk about the role of the mangrove, we talk about the role of the Martha Brae River. So all of these coming together, the impacts of pollution, etc. Next, please. All right, so I'm gonna go past that, and just for the second part about nature's rights is the fact that nature has rights. So we call that intrinsic value. So it's a value that we don't put on it. And I noted that our colleague from the Alligator Head Foundation did mention the issue of putting a value on. And there are many times in which it's difficult to put a value on natural resources, but there are models that we use as scientists and lawyers to put value on natural resources. So I took this slide out because this came from the environmental impact assessment for the Oyster Bay Resort Development. And the EIA, go back a little bit, please. And so basically it says, once known as the most brilliant bioluminescent bays in the world. And that's our, right? And it says once known. I found that interesting because the EIA said once known. Go ahead, please. Next slide. So what is the nature of our project? We have an objective to determine conservation methods for the ecosystem supporting the dinoflagellates that exist in Waters Bay in Falmouth, Trelawney here in Jamaica, to engage with stakeholders including local universities, colleges like UWI, Edna Manley School for Visual and Performing Arts, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, the National Environment and Planning Agency, etc. Also want to say that perhaps one of the biggest news is when Ms. Douglas announced that we are going to declare the area. And I saw Professor Winterling getting excited because that has always been the end game of the project and how we do it in a sustainable way. Next slide, please. So what are we looking at? Training local communities, and my colleague from tourism also noted that. And I also want to say, from the perspective of the project, we have been doing quite a bit of community work. We have been doing it with the fisher folk. We have been on the beach. We have been talking to people. From the University of the West Indies side, students have been in the area talking to persons. Do you know about this in waters? Interestingly, many people in the area have never been. Many people in the area actually don't know of glistening waters because you have to go there in the night to see it. And we are talking about tourism, and my colleague spoke about tourism. And in Jamaica, we have a problem with access to marine resources, right? But you also have a constitutional right to a healthy environment, and you also have a constitutional right to enjoy your own ecological heritage. And you have a constitutional right to enjoy that ecological heritage without harm. So there are a lot of issues that arise as we seek to protect the area, and cannot be just a paper protection where you just say glistening waters is declared. Jar has indicated biosphere reserve, and that has to be done also under legislation. And the public education program, we had started the public education program. The UWI, I gather I have 3 minutes left. The UWI also has been engaging with the students in the Faculty of Science and Technology to develop public educational programs. Go ahead, I'll tell you how to go. Okay, the commercial tourism sector, for the most part, you see pictures of people going to glistening waters. Most of those persons have water sports licenses, and so you go there, but you also have to pay if you want to go out into the water. So that's an issue that tourism needs to address. Can I enjoy this lovely place without having to pay? Suppose I just want to go and just view. What do I do, and what are the mechanisms for doing that? So again, creating sustainable funding, that's very important, and I'm positive that Ms. Douglas, that's part of the whole issue of a biosphere reserve. Biosphere reserve is a very unique space, because that's a no-take zone, for example. It's not that you can't do anything in there. So we can get into those kind of discussions. In the interest of time, I suppose I will not be able to do it, but a biosphere reserve is part of the protected area system. And I also want to note, Ms. Donaldson just indicated that there's a new protected areas plan, but glistening waters was always on the candidate list for protected area in Jamaica. And that's from 1997, when we had the first protected areas policy. So you see where we are coming. We are now in 2025. And that's why I'm saying it's very good news to know that we are actually going to be doing something. And I also want to note that in a recent conversation with the minister with responsibility for gender, entertainment, and culture, which is Honorable Olivia Green, she did indicate that the ministry, and I know that UNESCO also has an interface with the ministry, that she has a vested interest in ensuring that glistening waters is protected. So I think we're in a very good space at this point. Go ahead, please. All right, so the collaborating universities right now, Oslo National Academy of the Arts, which is Professor Winterling, Norwegian University of Science and Tech, that's where she was previously. She has now moved on to Oslo, UWI. We also had collaboration with University of British Columbia, because we're also looking at the social side, the gender side of things, and the Mali College for the Visual and Performing Arts. Because in all of this, art is kind of like the umbrella for the dissemination of information. It's a very dynamic space when you think of how the role of art in sending messages and disseminating information. Go ahead, please, next. So our non-government collaborators are Alligator Head Foundation, TBA 21, and Emma Ranston Young. So what are the research objectives? Examine the impacts of development on specific marine ecosystems, specifically the dinoflagellate population in the Falmouth Harbor. We have heard the information this morning, much of it, and it is very clear that we need to continue with the research, explore the existence of dinoflagellate populations in other parts of Jamaica, and we have heard anecdotal references to other populations that have basically disappeared. Because if you talk to fishermen, for example, if you talk to fisher folk in the area of the Blue Lagoon, people have reported seeing dinoflagellates in the night that we need to explore, causes and effects of development on the dinoflagellate population. And there's a lot of information out there from the people who are in the area. And Emma actually noted that if we were to, on a monthly basis, for example, just find out, there are the tour guides out there, So if you're talking about can capacity, industry, what do you say to tour guides? How do you know how many people are going to book? Bearing in mind that these are all commercial activities. These are all independent commercial operations operating along the bay, including hotels that have their own water sports facilities. And so how are we going to manage that space? That's very important. So in a real sense, whether we call it a biosphere reserve, it's a marine protected area. So in the case of the biosphere reserve, it's going to be a marine protected area within that wider context. Because what Ms. Douglas indicated is that what she's highlighting is the importance of the entire ecosystem, your land and sea interface, that is important to protect. Dr. Ranston Young mentioned, what about pollution from ordinary day-to-day activities? Then you have rainfall. Then we talk about climate change. So there are all different types of impacts on the area that we actually need to determine. Next, please. So just quickly, I noted UNESCO, and Ms. Douglas is part of the UNESCO terminology. And we just want to say, there are people who don't understand that your marine, there's something called marine heritage. The marine environment is part of your heritage. It's not just a scientific area. So when you talk about culture and heritage, your marine environment is a part of it, and UNESCO has been at the forefront of declaring these areas. Much of what I've said there has to do with World Heritage Sites. And even though Glistening Waters may not be a World Heritage Site, because you have to prove that there's something more special about it than every other bioluminescent bay anywhere else in the world, our objective is to protect the area, first of all, for us as Jamaicans. The initiative, today we have over 40 marine World Heritage Sites that have exceptional features in the world. So it's just to say the importance of understanding that as part of our culture and heritage, that the sea is part of our culture and part of our heritage. Next slide, please. So again, I've just indicated from as far back as 1997, if you look at the old protected areas policy, the Glistening Bay was listed as a candidate. All right, so I'm just going to go through quickly. So there are different laws in Jamaica that you can utilize to declare marine protected areas. One is the Beach Control Act, which we actually don't use today. It's an old piece of legislation that has provisions for marine protected areas. We don't use it today because we use the NRCA Act. Next slide, please. So basically, you could declare a marine area under the Beach Control Act, and you can actually regulate the activities, right? So that's a legal framework for managing the space. Next slide. But then you also have so that's the Beach Control Act as well. Next slide, please. So then we have the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act, that's the NRCA Act. Most of our protected areas today, our marine protected areas, are actually declared under this act. For example, if you're from St. James, you would know, for example, the Montego Bay Marine Park. They are declared under the Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act. And the act has a very interesting provision. And if you note it says there is an entity that NRCA must consult with, and that's the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. We're going to talk about, in this case, is a fish sanctuary, but they are all protected areas. And so we have to understand that there are different types of protected areas. So that your Fisheries Act. Next, please. Next slide. The Jamaica National Heritage Trust Act also provides for the protection of almost anything. And if we think about the Blue Lagoon right now, the Blue Lagoon is actually declared under the Jamaica National Heritage Trust Act to protect the Glistening Waters Bay. I gather I have no time left. So I know that Ms. Douglas mentioned Biosphere Reserve. I just wanted to just explain what it is quickly. It's under the Man and Biosphere program, and it promotes sustainable development by combining strictly protected core areas with zones where local communities can engage with sustainable economic activities. So it's not and if you look at what she described in terms of the bay and the surrounding areas, the necessity to engage with communities as part of a protected areas program, and globally, there's no such thing as a protected area, basically, unless you have the community involved. Because you need people to manage as well as to whilst you're regulating their behavior. So I'm going to end there, and if we have questions, then I'll be available to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis-Mattis. As we look at the interface of science, arts, law, cultural studies, humanities, and indigenous knowledge. A lot of the times we get to the point where we don't recognize the people who are on the ground are just as important. We're exploring the obtaining of conservation methods. We're engaging stakeholders. We're looking at training, the other aspects of this that we need to be taking into consideration. Dr. Trench?
Good afternoon, and thank you. So I'll try to be brief in terms of what I can share with you about the Oyster Bay area. So I am a mangrove researcher primarily, and I've been doing a lot of work, especially in the Falmouth area. I don't have a lot of slides because I don't want to pull it out, but just so you know, in terms of mangrove coverage, the Trelawney Parish has lost the most mangroves in terms of hectares for the last 10 years, hands down, being nestled between St. Anne and St. James with Ocherius and Montego Bay, has lost about 300 hectares of mangroves in the last less than 10 years. So, next slide, please. Mangroves, I won't bore you to death about the biology of these mangroves, but those are some of the characteristics that makes a plant a mangrove, and the students will be interested in this. So mangroves have specific characteristics. They are tropical species. They only live in warm environments. They are adapted to surviving salty environments. They don't have to live in salt, but they're what we call facultative halophytes. They have seedlings, not seeds, meaning they are viviparous. They are fully developed before they leave their parents, even though they are coiled in a seed coat. So we would consider them to have very rapid germination, but they are already grown while on the tree. They have specialized roots to deal with the battering of the sea. Whether it's with prop roots, drop roots, they have special things in them called erenchyma that makes them nice and light. And as I learned earlier today, very important bacteria grow on these roots that are important for the Danish flagellate growth. So I learned a lot this morning. Clearly, I am not the kind of person who looks a lot in a microscope like Dr. Ranston Young. So I look to learn these things. So next slide, please. Mangroves have over 200 functions, and in Jamaica, we just skim the uses of them. And I can tell you, the Luminous Lagoon, Glistening Waters areas has been a fascination for me, even without any collaboration on this project. I literally have a slide of the valley of the mangrove overlooking the bay, and ecotourism is one of the main things. I was fascinated to find out that the area can have over 1,000 visitors per day, and I've witnessed it personally twice, and I was pleasantly, not forced, but I gladly went and did a third time there when my mother said to me that it's on her bucket list and she wanted to go there. And I'm very happy that I did that, because several years later she passed away and she's no longer with us. So I'm going to look for that picture and cherish it. So she wanted to rub her hand in that glistening water, and such a wonderful experience. I'm sure you'll hear more from NEPA about this area and the plans, but that is the area that we've been working on. Winds Morass, that's the name for the western side of it, and the Oyster Bay. I'm very happy to hear about the history of the development of Oyster Bay this morning. Emma, it always fascinated me how it developed like that. Very much impacted now. And next slide, please. Mangroves can suffer from both human and natural impacts. So on the left there, you can see a mangrove forest that I tried to annotate it. You have the current forest edge with the taller trees. You have the original edge, which is about 40 meters away. Nobody bulldozed that. What caused it? Sometimes it's just an accumulation of sand. Sometimes storm events throw excessive sand near the mangrove areas, and they cannot deal with all that sand, and they wither away. Obviously, it's very different when humans come in, sometimes a lot more rapid. Examples like that St. James picture, that is just a stone throw away from Falmouth down in Lilliput. St. James right on the border near to Greenwood, where we have a lot of reclamation happening in the mangrove. And I actually, with my colleagues, have a paper in draft that is going to talk specifically about the Trelawney mangrove area, where we have seen that Trelawney has, as I said, nearly 300 hectares have been lost in less than 10 years. 50% of these are houses. About another 50% are business places. About 90% of these are illegal and informal reclamation activities, meaning they're not permitted, they don't have a license from NEPA. For the most part, it is persons just wanting somewhere to live, so they capture a piece of land and they live there. And that happens all over Trelawney, especially with the growth of the tourism industry. And we didn't plan to have low-income houses to facilitate these persons. And as you know, in Jamaica, it is expensive to dig into the limestone hillside, so it's a lot cheaper to buy 2 loads of marl, or sometimes to get 2 loads of marl, because a load of marl, unfortunately, dumped anywhere is not regulated in Jamaica. Another thing that we need to highlight is the fact that mangroves themselves, as beautiful as they are and as great as they are not a protected species either. So by law, nothing can stop you from cut down a single mangrove tree. However, they are protected as a large ecosystem in a protected area and as a wetland system, but the species itself is not protected. And this is a big gap, which was identified in the National Mangrove and Management Plan. Next slide, please. So in the area, in the Luminous Lagoon, Rock area, many things affect it. The cruise ship port came in, waves are now heavier there. There's a lot of shoreline loss there. Persons cut it for charcoal, and these are actually some pictures from the area. That picture on the top right, mangrove reclamation, that is somebody building a house there after NEPA put up a sign to say no more building. So it is just showing you how serious persons are and how much on top of it the regulatory agencies have to be. Next slide, please. So some work that is ongoing or completed in the area. So we did a study for NEPA, and we were fortunate enough to do a restoration of or rehabilitation of one section of that site. Next slide, and I'll tell you about it. Next. So that is the pre-development, or well, not way pre-development. You can see on the left side there. All right, on the picture on the right, you can see those ponds. Those numbers are telling you the salinity of the mangrove areas. Mangroves thrive best in a salinity of about 12, 10, 15. So the one on the far right there, the salinity was perfect. But look at the one in the middle where the ponds are. So those fish ponds were created by, I think, the FAO back in the 70s or something. And now no mangroves can grow there because it has a salinity of 178 parts per thousand. Hardly anything can live in it, let alone mangroves. Next slide. So what we did for NEPA, we did a restoration plan. And this is just showing you a snapshot of some of the work that we have to do. Even though I'm a marine biologist, we have to employ all kind of disciplines. So we have to bring in a topographic surveyor to do the levels to see what is the approach for restoring this mangrove. You can see the differences in spot heights. In the middle there where it's pink, you see minus 1.2. That is minus 1.2 meters. So that pond there is about 1.2 meters deep. So it would need 1.2 meters of sediment to bring it up back to sea level. So you can put mangroves in it. So that wider area will take over 1,000 truckloads of material to refill it and put it back into mangroves. Next slide, please. And that is a project that is pending. I know NEPA is working actively at it. I know PIOJ has plans to work on it as well. We did one section there across from the rock community. That is Windmar section. You can see it circled there in red. And we literally had to bring in a bulldozer and we removed it and we put the mangrove back to sea level. And that's a picture from 2022. You can see the mangroves were growing. That's me with my MSc class. Unfortunately, I didn't put in the slide for 2024. It is now unrecognizable. The trees are now like 4 or 5 meters tall, and it looks almost back to what it was in, well, it will never be back to what it was ever originally, but definitely in modern times, it is showing a lot of progress, and it is just across from the rock community. Next. But I can restore mangroves, and we can pay for it. We can build back any mangrove if you have the right amount of money. But it is very difficult to do and almost impossible to do if people live there. So it is more ideal if we focus our energy on conservation. So I want to tell you briefly about a conservation project that UA has been spearheading with, UA has been spearheading under the auspices of NEPA. It is NEPA's land, I have to say, hats off to NEPA. And this is, as far as I know, the first mangrove conservation project in Jamaica where the government of Jamaica actually bought private lands and put it into conservation, and NEPA did that. So round of applause for that. And nearly 50 acres of mangroves are there. We were fortunate enough because the previous owner didn't have much interest in the land and was very conservation minded. But the point is, the government of Jamaica and private entities, NGOs, etc., you can buy land for conservation because there's not a lot of things that persons can do with it, especially with the stringent mangrove laws. So some of them are willing to sell. But I don't think, apart from this project, if persons have ever been approached to buy land for conservation. So we're not doing fundraising, not just for the education and all of that. We can literally buy land to conserve it. And the area around the Winds Morass Rock area is in threat. And it has grown about 5-fold in terms of the amount of boat operators and developments. So it is begging for a project like this in Saltmarsh. And before I close, in this community, we literally have monitoring plots right up against where the persons live. And I was telling one of my interns yesterday, why did we do that? By the residents knowing that we come back every year to monitor it, none of the plots have had a decline, except one that has had a natural decline. So that strategy works. You cannot just put together a conservation project and walk away from it. You have to have very regular monitoring. So the area is begging for that. Next slide. And I think I'm close to the end now. So one other thing we're going to be doing down there, we're going to be setting up a living lab. Sadly, we don't have any understanding or budget for dinoflagellates, but I'm more than happy to talk to the collaborators of this project to see what we can do together. This was a funding from the Irish Aid and AT University in Ireland. Next slide, please. Thank you very much, and I hope I can answer some questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Trench. And we must be aware, I mean, while it is alarming that Trelawney, and we've recognized how valuable it is, Ms. Douglas has pointed out that is not just Glistening Waters, but putting it into perspective for the entire parish, that area and the value, not just economic and environmental, but in other ways as well. 300 hectares over the last 10 years. Are you not alarmed? I am. So, but I am reassured because Dr. Trench in his presentation has given us a roadmap. We have a proof of concept of what can happen. We have a way for how we can make sure. And students, you are coming up as the future consumers and the future policymakers. So you now know that, guess what? You can look at buying land for conservation. It's not just to build houses. So we look at how are we going to make the decisions moving forward and what are we going to ask? And also being reassured, because a lot of the times our agencies get a big whooping, you know, because there is so much that needs to be done. But to be able to highlight the notice of the North Coast Mangrove Conservation Project, where the government has taken the lead to make sure that the purchase was done, to make sure that we set up areas for conservation is very, very, very encouraging. So we're looking at strategies that work. We're looking at the importance of involvement. And so I see us having a roadmap to making sure that dossier is going to be so tight and so right that we're going to make sure that our destination is where we are going to get. And with that, I'm going to invite Miss Andrea Donaldson to make her presentation so we get yet another slice of what makes this what it needs to be. Make her welcome, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the National Environment and Planning Agency, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to allowing us to speak here today. So, next slide, please. So this is an overview of what the presentation is, and I'll try for time's sake to go through as quickly as possible. Next slide. So, as you notice, Oyster Bay is influenced by the Martha Brae watershed, which consists of a wetland ecosystem. Next slide. So there's a number of policy plans that impact the area. The Natural Resources Conservation Authority Act on its permit and licensing system, where we issue permits for development activities which have conditions aimed to try and protect the bioluminescence. The Town and Country Planning Act, there's a development order for Trelawney that has zoned the area as conservation. And under the Wildlife Protection Act, the Glistening Water Game Reserve was declared. In terms of plans and policies, the Wetland Policy of Jamaica 2014 sets out the conservation activities needed for wetlands, and the ridge to reef effect was noted as important for the glistening waters. The management, the mangrove and swamp forest was plan was mentioned, and there's also the winds morass management plan. Next slide. So I'm going to look at two developments and the interventions that were done in regards to those developments. Sorry about that. Next slide. So the Falmouth cruise ship pier was a development that required an environmental impact assessment because of the extent of the development and the likely impact that would have been caused. In doing the development, one of the activities of the agency is where there's removal of mangroves, there must be restoration of mangroves at another location or the provision of funds. So the Port Authority created an escrow fund instead of restoration. And in that escrow fund, funds were placed based on evaluation of the wetlands. Part of the monitoring of the development was monitoring the bioluminescence. This was done between 2005 and 2021. This was done to see that the conditions the permit was put in to ensure the protection of the bioluminescence was being undertaken. Next slide. So the hotel development that was done in Oyster Bay, one of the conditions of this development was that there should be a no-build conservation area. That no-build conservation area was the mangrove area. Presently, we're looking at putting in a tree preservation order for that location. A tree preservation order normally states that there can be no cutting or removal of any trees in that location. Next slide, please. So in this area, it shows the conservation areas that's within Oyster Bay and the winds morass. Next slide, please. So in terms of actions to safeguard the bioluminescence, in 2020, the National Environment and Planning Agency, through a project funded by the International Atomic Energy Agency, had contracted Dr. Ranston to do an assessment of the water quality requirements for the bioluminescence. Based on her assessment, she had recommended, and some of these were said already, maintaining the flow in the Martha Brae, avoided removal of the mangroves, develop a resource use and management plan in regards to sewage treatment. Next slide, please. Next slide. This was said, establish tourism carrying capacity, reduce light pollution, which is very important. A lot of us like a lot of lights, but not low intensity lights. And to restrict internal combustion engines and encourage alternative options like kayaking, because that's only using human energy. Next slide, please. So the Winds Morass was part of the mangrove restoration. So Winds Morass is 57.1 hectares. The Natural Resources Conservation Authority has a 49-year lease on the lands, and they're implementing projects related to this protected area. The escrow fund that was set up under the Port Authority for the Port Falmouth Marine Pier, is used to maintain the area. Next slide, please. So if you keep clicking, this shows, can you keep, next slide. What should have happened, I have 5 minutes, it should have shown you the progress from what it was Dr. Trench had shown you to where it is now, an improvement. So one of the challenges, informal settlement, that is a challenge. Even though you have discussions, it still occurs. Limited resources, the human resource to do the enforcement. You don't want to enforce, but it is a given, you must do the enforcement. Again, the development pressure, the expansion necessary for Falmouth, the low intensity institutional coordination to manage Oyster Bay and the surrounding, and the gaps in research. Next slide. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
And we truly are getting into the meat of the matter, and the contributions are so essential for us to make fulsome and wholesome decisions and actions. Thank you so much, Ms. Donaldson. The policies and the plans for coastal and watershed management, the conditions for development, that tree preservation order seems very much in line, especially after Dr. Trench let us know that after we are learning here so much of the value of mangroves, on their own, they are not protected. So it is essential for us to look at ways to be able to make sure that we don't lose not even another half a hectare, much less another 300. The recommendations outlined are encouraging, and so the roadmap is there. So the question is, what do we now do, and how are we going to do it through collaboration as the way forward, not only on what we have, but why we need to, not just protect it, but promote it, and how we're going to do this together. The challenge of informal settlements keeps coming back. So as we have collaborated and the conversation is going in on why this space is important, then we have our next steps coming out, because this is a factor that we have to deal with in the space. So how are we going to deal with informal settlements, creatively coming up with the solution? And while it is that we have to look at enforcement, when we're looking at inclusion, we cannot limit it just to that. So when we look at people science, how are we going to get that done? Dr. Trench just gave us an excellent example of that kind of involvement once people are aware that the monitoring is happening, because they begin to understand. And I would dare say, maybe if we're here in another generation and finding out what is the impact of the next generation of people who are living in that space in terms of their view as it relates to what mangroves are, because of the work that is being done, then we might be able to see the progress that's going on. So thank you so much for continuing. Are you still here? I can't hear you. All right. So we are now going to invite Ms. Tamoy Sinclair to contribute to this robust and enlightening conversation. And it not so depressing, not true? It's a little full of hope, don't you think so? Big issues to tackle, but I think we're having ways to do it. And what I love about this the most is that we're doing it together. So we're getting even deeper into the collaborative agency that we have. Ms. Sinclair, let her feel welcome now.
Thank you very much. Good Afternoon, everyone. All right. The presentation, the role of the municipal corporation in the preservation of the bioluminescence in Oyster Bay, Trelawney. So now my presentation will be highlighting the crucial role of the municipal corporation in preserving the bioluminescence in Oyster Bay, Trelawney, and of course the broader coastal areas through planning, development, and sustainable practices. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so the role of the Trelawney Municipal Corporation. Now, the municipality holds jurisdiction over the entire parish, which includes the coastline and also the coastal waters. We collaborate with all agencies, non-governmental agencies, governmental agencies, to manage the coastal environment and all the resources within the parish of Trelawney. Now, the role of the municipal corporation is threefold. We have regulation powers, coordinate collaboration with agencies, and of course we do local sustainable development planning. As it relates to coordinating powers, we focus on building and planning approval, and also development control, licensing of trade business, street parking, and of course we want to also control vending. What was also made mention of was a lot of informal settlements, so the municipality also focuses on regulating these informal settlements as well. Paramount to this, to ensure that the job is done, we need to facilitate coordination amongst the agencies, not just the agencies, but of course community members that are very critical to this process, so we ensure that all the voices are included whenever we are ensuring that decisions are being made. The municipality is also responsible by law to do the local sustainable development plan. Now, this plan is pretty much an initiative just to ensure that we have orderly and balanced development that is taking place within the parish. The Trelawney Municipal Corporation does in fact have a local sustainable development plan, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we, within the western region of Jamaica, I think we are the only parish that actually has a completed local sustainable development plan. Next slide, please. In terms of being a legislative authority, the municipal corporation functions as the local planning authority. For any activity relating to development to take place, these applications must be made through the municipal corporation, and we are guided by, various legislation such as the Local Governance Act. How is it that we make plans? How is it that we engage the public and ensure that we have citizen engagement is a predominant factor of the Local Governance Act. We also utilize the Town and Country Planning Act, and of course the Trelawney Confirmed Development Order and Building Act to utilize and monitor in terms of how we ensure that development is done in an orderly and sustainable manner. The corporation, of course, always works in partnership. Even though we are the local authority at the parish level, we are also responsible to share on a national perspective what are our objectives, and for the on a national level for them to also advise us on a local level. And so the municipal corporation partners with the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development, and of course national agencies such as NEPA, which spoke earlier. Next, please. So in terms of the Biosphere Reserve, what is the role of the municipal corporation? As a local planning authority, one of our core duties is to ensure that we play a central role in not only establishing this Biosphere Reserve, but also in managing the one for Trelawney area. The proposed Trelawney Biosphere Reserve, as was stated earlier, will extend from the Cockpit country that is in southern Trelawney that most persons would know, Usain Bolt, Trelawney Yam, and also makes its way down to the coastal area to include Oyster Bay, which takes the precedence of much of what we have been speaking about today. Within that biosphere reserve, we have a lot of delicate ecosystems and a lot of species that we need to be mindful of in terms of setting local plans in place to protect not just Oyster Bay, but also the ecosystems that is in southern Trelawney, that all of them impact Oyster Bay itself. Next, please. We continue as a municipality to promote good governance, and when we say good governance, to make the right type of policies to protect our natural and built environment. On a monthly basis at the municipal corporations, we have several committee meetings, which include all the political directorate, critical agency heads, and technical officers that deliberate on key issues that are affecting the parish relating to development and the natural environment, where we make policies and take effective decisions to address these concerns. So we are focused on good governance, sustainable social and economic development of the biosphere. What we have been focusing on a lot today is Oyster Bay, and the truth is it has significant economic impact for the country, but of course the residents in Trelawney. So we have to be very mindful and careful about what are the steps that we take to preserve that for local economic development. We also facilitate, coordinate, and supervise monitoring in the biosphere. We have several technical departments within the Trelawney Municipal Corporation, which would include the planning department and also our roads and works department, where we have technical officers, building officers, and so forth, enforcement officers that actually go out on a day-to-day basis to monitor what is happening within the communities and to serve the necessary notices. Through the activities of the enforcement arm of the municipal corporation, things like squatting, we are able to reduce them by taking them to court the formal way. So we are cognizant of some of the challenges, but I just want to rest assured that the municipality is working, and we do have our officers that are out monitoring some of these issues. We also administer regulations related to the protection of specific sites in the biosphere with the assistance, of course, of NEPA and other strategic agencies, and we monitor and guide development in the biosphere reserve. Next, please. In terms of the planning process and stakeholder engagement, we have, which I had stated before, the only parish in the West with a completed local sustainable development plan. Section 21 of the Local Governance Act set out the regulations for us to complete that act, and the plan that is in place does in fact consider the environment, economic, social factors, all of which align to sustainable development principles when the plan was being carried out. And through the development of the plan, some of the activities that are set out in them are actually being executed on a day-to-day basis. Next, please. Of course, nothing happens without proper consultation. We cannot have good governance without proper consultation. And so the municipality also always endeavors to facilitate consultation at all levels. We have a responsibility to engage communities and stakeholders through a consultative process, which we do through town hall meetings and community meetings. The SDC plays a crucial role in this, in assisting us to engage various community groups that we have within the parish. We have several housing developments across Trelawney that we engage them to find out what are the activities that they are doing, how can they be involved in the process in terms of sharing ideas about how we should move certain policies, and their involvement not only to develop these policies but also to sustain them once they are implemented. Next, please. Next slide, please. In terms of the natural environment and sustainable development, we continue to use an integrated planning approach. The municipal corporation's responsibility includes a balanced consideration of both the build and the natural environment. We ensure that zoning, planning, and development control processes must evaluate the natural resource use, ecosystem, and health. And earlier I had highlighted the strong role that the planning and the roads and works department does in terms of every single building application or subdivision application that comes into the municipality for development. We thoroughly review them and ensure that there are certain conditions of approval that are provided for them before they do any preparatory works, and that is agreed. And we also have officers whose responsibility is it to monitor throughout the development process. We try to facilitate a coexistence of development and conservation at all times, liaising with critical stakeholders such as the NEPA to ensure that environmental considerations is always an important factor in the development process. Environmental preservation is integral to sustainable urban development and community well-being. Next slide, please. Of course, there are always several challenges within our municipality that we are cognizant of. Some of these challenges will include the drag line that is within Trelawney, right? It was used for dredging, but it posed several risks to the coastal ecosystems. The municipal corporation is always working with the National Works Agency and NEPA to mitigate whatever environmental issues that is happening within the municipality of Trelawney. We are cognizant that we have, because of the development that is taking place in some of these sensitive areas, we need to be very mindful about sewage disposal and solid waste management. And so we work with agencies such as the National Solid Waste Management Authority and even through our Roads and Works Department to have a more stringent method to ensure that we address some of these concerns. The next slide, please. In conclusion, the Trelawney Municipal Corporation is the central planning authority within the parish of Trelawney. We are always focusing on planning and development and environmental management to include the coastline. We are responsible for engaging the community and promoting sustainable development, which we continue to do. And the municipal corporation stands prepared to support all critical government and non-governmental agencies to do whatever is necessary to protect our built and natural environment. And we welcome the opportunity to partner with Ms. Douglas and any other agency within this room that can support the development and sustainability of Oyster Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sinclair, for outlining, and it's commendable. Trelawney, the only parish in the West with a completed local sustainable development plan. So if we have this conversation again in 5 years, we shouldn't be talking about the same issues. We should have at least moved a little bit, right? Right? Because if there's a plan in place, then we need to figure out how we're going to get there. And we need to be a little bit more active in what we're doing. Are we all good? Yes. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the contribution of so many persons. We've started with why are we here? These amazing beings, these microorganisms that have brought us together here. The tiny that really is the big thing. And we have gone global. We've brought it regional, we've brought it back national, we've done a deep dive as to what are the threads that are necessary for us not only to protect this, but to promote it because it's so essential to what it is that we're having here. You've heard everything. I'm now going to open the floor. Comments, questions, clarifications. Can we get a microphone here, sir? We have. Thank you very much.
Hello, Dr. Trench. Mangroves are great carbon sinks. I've heard nobody say anything about carbon sequestration and using that as a mechanism to actually promote the conservation of and pay for the conservation of our mangroves. And of course, this is always the big problem that we have is where's the money coming from? How is it going to become sustainable? Everybody here talking today is talking about a project which is funded by somebody or the other, which is not sustainable. So we have to find a way to make things sustainable. What are we doing about the whole business of carbon trading?
Okay. Yes, you're absolutely right, but I do not think, well, I guess in short, this forum wouldn't go too much into that. Jamaica is just learning about mangrove and carbon. It's something that we're just getting into. I don't think we fully understand it. It can be a very complicated mechanism. It does have some promise, and it also has some very bad loopholes as well. So I think Jamaica is still learning about the carbon market and how to get into it. I don't think we have a full grasp of it just yet. I know the agencies are going through it. I know NEPA has now started to put a lot of value on carbon, and they have an internal evaluator, etc. So, but in short, we're getting there, but we're not there yet, because we have, as you can see, we have a paucity of research, and carbon is one of them. For example, we have one student at UA now doing a PhD on carbon, and we have a lot more to study before we actually get there, like some of the more developed states. So we're getting there, but not quite yet.
All right, so we have, that's one thing that we need to keep an eye on and make sure that we don't stay in the getting there stage, but we actually start moving to get somewhere, especially because so many other places have moved ahead of us, but we get there the right way. I hear you, Dr. Trench, saying that it's important to get there, but we need to get there the right way, especially when we observe the gaps that are in the process. Sir, you had comment, question?
A comment and a question. Allow me please to commend the organizers, the presenters, the panelists on this very informative and enlightening symposium. For me, I have been to preservation and protect, whichever comes first, understandably. But is there work being done in terms of research for the eventuality if something should happen devastatingly to our dinoflagellate population?
Dr. Ranston-Young, you want to pour into that? Can we get the microphone?
Well, I did mention that monitoring needs to be improved and more regular. I think the monitoring aspect of things would help. And it would help us to understand more about the dinoflagellates, how they respond to changes in their environment. I think that's critical, that's the foundation. And then you can work with that to try and determine how we can, or what we can put in place to protect them in the event of things happening.
I would include that under preserve and protect.
Yeah.
I'm talking about if something should wipe out the dinoflagellate
And
population. Do we know by research and development how to repopulate?
Research has been done in other areas. Biobays in some countries have, like I said, gone dark. Usually it's nature that has impacted the area and caused a problem, but they eventually do come back. Research has been done in other areas. And what we can do is we can have cultures of the dinoflagellates, so we can actually grow them in a lab and have, I don't think anybody here is really doing that right now. It is something that needs to be looked into. But in other areas, other countries, they do have cultures of the dinoflagellates. So that's an option there. Yeah. Okay.
So again, we realize from all our discussions, there's no shortage of spaces that need exploration and research. So students, you bear that in mind. We have another question, comment? All of three. Okay, sir.
Sorry, I'll try to be as brief as possible as it relates to the questions I have. The first one would be to Mrs. Davis Mattis. I see that you're here speaking environmental law. In your presentation, you mentioned the carrying capacity of the area. And I was wondering if there are any laws put in place to actually control vessels' entry, apart from saying having a license to operate there.
Thanks. So I think my colleague from tourism indicated that part of the management regime, which is common for how you manage a particular space, a confined space, is carrying out carrying capacity studies. My comment was that it's not an exact science. And my comment was also that when we determine what the carrying capacity is, there are other dynamics that we need to look at. In the sense that the persons there, as you said, are also already regulated. So they have water sports licenses from tourism. They would have other licenses from NEPA. But then, bearing in mind, I didn't get to go to the entire presentation. The marine environment is not really owned by us per se.
That's what I was wondering
exactly.
about.
So, but in a sense, the regulatory agencies have the authority to determine what happens in those spaces.
Okay.
My personal view is that access to marine resources in this country is a critical issue, and that when we look at a place like Glistening Waters, Oyster Bay, that we must find a way to provide access to Jamaicans. Right? You may not want to go on a boat. Our tourism rep here also indicated that perhaps you may not want boats in there. I mean, that's a discussion for almost all marine protected areas. What kind of vessels do you have in there? If you are going by kayaks only, then how do you deal with that, with the thousands that we hear are going to Oyster Bay? How many kayaks do you have? No. And how many lifeguards do you need because of that? So I think it's a dynamic discussion. And if you look at it within the context of the Man and the Biosphere Reserve, then when you listen to the other presentations, Andrea was also very clear, as well as our colleague from the Municipal Council. You talk about an entire parish, but you have our legislative layers. So you have a layer from NEPA, you need a permit to the X. You need planning permit from somebody else. So what you have are, my term, legislative layers that also have to be managed so that the management of the wider area and the smaller pockets that need special protection, that the efforts are sustainable. And therefore, again, the need for the community members to understand the space in which they live, what are you interfacing with. And so the whole concept of the biosphere and how we interface also becomes a very important part of that discussion. So my view, I think going forward, one of our question was, what's the research going for the project which I described, which we're also trying to get funding for, is to look at those issues. So we have the local players on the ground. We have NEPA on the ground doing a lot of work. We have Emma as an independent consultant doing a lot of work. We have UNESCO doing a lot of work. So it's for us to really bring the research together and to determine how we go forward. So there needs to think there who's dealing with mangroves now from forestry. And so it's a very dynamic discussion. I think at the end of the day, we also need to understand, I spoke about our ecological heritage, that this is ours. And we should insist that it is ours. So Jamaicans must be first. And the tourists come after. That's just my view. Even though, and that's my personal view, it's a personal view, even though the tourism dollars become important, but you have to understand how you build out an industry and how you engage with people with their own resources and how you provide access. So again, just in concluding this part, there is a lot going on. I think we need to bring the information together in one space. I think we need to share the information in our own, somebody needs to lead the process. So the process now, to me, needs to be led in order to get to where JAR wants to take us. That's my view.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Douglas. One moment, please, in response. Can we get there? Don't forget those other two questions, you know. You write them down? Good.
Yes, I just want to be very clear. I'm the chairman of the Jamaica, the MAB committee of the Jamaica National Commission for UNESCO. This is the nation of Jamaica. It is a state, the nation state, the sovereign state of Jamaica. The commission is headed by the Minister of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. The MAB committee is comprised of key agencies such as NEPA, and indicates, because we have 4 candidate sites across the island. So the NEPA, Forestry Department, there are some key government agencies that form the MAB.
To spare everybody, I'm going to really trim it down, right? So that we can get out of here and have some lunch and interact with the persons. I must ask you, first of all, to give a round of applause to our moderator, Nikki Myers, who has kept us really going. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to try and be brief. I know, Eartha, you need to join me up here soon if you're ready, but I'm going to start thanking people. So our principal director, Ms. Joan Archibald, from our parent ministry, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. She was here earlier today. She had to leave, but she came and brought the statement from our minister, and we are happy that we had that kind of involvement with our parent ministry. They continue to support the Institute of Jamaica and our activities. They helped us with the program. They help us with all our activities, and we really have to thank them. They're the ones who fund the budget. Our sponsors, and I think we're going to do some tokens now for our sponsors. We could not have had this event without the involvement of our sponsors. They're coming up now, Eartha, or do I continue speaking? All right, so I'm going to continue thanking people on my list and just naming our sponsors. So UNESCO, and Ali Beck had to leave, but he was here earlier. TPDCO, and the persons on the program who brought greetings. Damien, thank you. Office of Contemporary Art from Norway, thank you. Forestry Department, Alligator Head Foundation, Thyssen Bournemouth Art Contemporary, I hope I had that. All our panelists, thank you so much. And they're listed on the program side. I hope, just forgive me if I don't call all the names, but thank you so much for supporting us today. We had students and teachers from Shortwood Teachers College, Vauxhall High School, Wolmer's High School, Kingston Technical High School. Did I leave anybody off? No? And I'm just thanking you all for staying with us. You, our audience, thank you so much for being with us today. And again, for those of you who stayed here with us. I noticed in the audience that we had members of our former council, Ms. Joy Douglas CD, thank you so much, OD. Mr. Hawthorne Watson is a member of the Natural History, or former member of our board, thank you. Susanna Torkan, Dr. Susanna Torkan was on our board, and I could go on. So just thank you for continuing to support the Natural History Museum of Jamaica. We're going to continue here on Sunday with our artistic workshop, and that will be led by the Edna Manley School of the Performing Arts, and I'd just like to thank Miriam and her team who will be here on Sunday. It's a last Sunday for the Institute of Jamaica. Every last Sunday we are open, so that will also be taking place. Thanking members of the Jamaica National Commission to UNESCO who are also here, our staff here at IOJ, and for those who don't know, IOJ involves a lot of departments and division. We were pleased to have all the staff of the NHMJ who have supported our activity here today. Special note, though, I have to thank the Education Department, led by Eartha Cole, for really pulling this together, and I'm just asking you again to give them a warm round of applause. Now, Eartha is coming up with some tokens, or Shamir, or who is doing it, please? And who is handing out the tokens? Okay, thank you. Do you want me to read the names? Or I don't have, who do I start with? The panelists? Okay. So let me choose the ladies. Ladies to my TPD Co. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I forgot to add that Lalita was also a member of the Natural History Board. Thank you, Lalita. Thank you. Let's see who else. Could not be left out. The sponsors, no, I wanted to show you the sponsors. Oh, Emma, yes. Come up, Emma. Emma. Okay, so Emma, you've joined us on stage for yours. We will send Dr. Michael Latz's token up to him up by Scripps. And we'd also like to invite Dr. Winterlin, Professor Winterlin. Suzanne, can you join us on the stage too? Thank you. All right. Bring her to the middle. She's right here, in the middle. Where is the Yes. Is that it, Eartha? All right, so thank you so much. And let me, just before you're coming back to the mic? Yes, she's coming back to the mic. Just before I go, just to thank you for supporting the Institute of Jamaica and the Natural History Museum, and to encourage you to continue supporting our activities and events, and to follow us on social media. For us, it's the Institute of Jamaica, and for Natural History, it's I Love NHMJ. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Technician, do we have those images from Captain Dave and that video? This is real time from somebody who does this and has been doing this for a while. Captain Dave? Real time. Ladies and gentlemen, this man relates with the space on a daily basis. And as you experience Glistening Waters and Oyster Bay, one and the same. Thank you very much for sharing time and space with us here at the Institute of Jamaica. Lunch is provided. Bring the same good attitude, smiles, and enthusiasm as we continue our involvement or engagement and the conversation into conservation. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
watch me. Son I get tall and gray up on my father and times getting harder cause the circle getting smaller. Face all the karma for me, blind to the drama never. Full suit of armor for the feelings that I harbor. Well, I live a life I'm a prouder. See the smile of my mother, and the stone in the corner. Working harder and harder, belly full up my maga. Come on blessed by the Father, and time of the Master. You can't buy time with your fortune. Appreciate the little things in your garden, and you don't know when the life I can call you. So live it up because time can't bargain. Hey, cause time no wait on no one. We're moving through the motions. Soon we pass and gone. Memories live on. Nobody don't know what this future gon' hold. So keep your loved ones them close. What you see that you sow. We living life on the go. We no fear the unknown. Cause in the midst of disaster, we look to the Father. Get your goals in a life, don't afraid. I live it up until you're old and gray. We never itching at the for your day. Beg on to listen what the rest of man I say. Cause if you can't buy time with your fortune, appreciate the little things in your garden. And you don't know when your life I gonna call you. So live it up because time can't bargain. Hey, cause time no wait on no one. We're moving through the motions. Soon we pass and gone. Memories live